My name is Callen, and for most of my life, I've been the background noise in my own family. That night I sat near a sliding glass door at my sister Mallerie's backyard party, nursing a glass of water while the laughter swelled around me, the kind of laughter that stings a little too loud to her heart. I'd heard it before, I knew exactly how it ended. Mallerie was on Errol telling some childhood story about though I once spilled orange juice on my third grade teacher and cried like the sky was falling. She embellished, of course, she always did, and the crowd ate it up. My mother laughed the hardest my father offered her. That sounds like our Sarah, with a smirk. I didn't say a word then. Cutting through the noise like a sharp wind through fog came a small voice. But she flies a jet. The air-shifted chairs stopped creaking. Forks froze midair. Mallerie blinked down at her 10-year-old son. William turned tower-wide-eyed and unbothered. Aunt Sierra flees a jet. She showed me she wears headset and everything. Mallerie Smith opened, but nothing came out. I took another sip of water. Didn't nod. Did it confirm? Just let the silence stretch long and weighty. Some truths don't need to be shouted, especially when they come from the only person in the room who was actually paying attention. When you grow up with someone like Mallerie, you learn to shrink early. She was the kind of child who demanded attention just by breathing, blonde, loud, and possibly quick with comebacks that made adults laugh and teachers overlook her cruelty. She always knew how to fill a room and, more importantly, how to time out of it. I was quieter, darker hair, bookish. If Mallerie was fireworks, I was static. People noticed her. They forget me in the same breath. I used to think that was just how families work. Some kids shine, others decorate stages. Every school event became her stage. If I made honor roll, she'd win Thetland show. If I learned to play piano, choreograph a dance and perform it barefoot on grandma's dining table, and somehow the family framed it all as natural. She's just got the spark, my dad would say, ruffling her hair. Don't pajila Sierra, my mom would add when I pulled back a little. You're different, you're more ground to ground. That word stuck like tar. Stop trying to be seen. After a while, the less I offered, the less they had to compare. And the quieter I got, the more they used my silence as proof that Mallerie was a better one. By high school, she was prom queen. I was working part-time in the school library trying to save up for flight lessons no one in the house knew I was taking. I never told them I was applying to aviation school. So didn't think they care. Worse, I thought they might laugh. When I got my acceptance letter, I opened it alone in my car outside the post office. I remember sitting there with it pressed against my chest, smiling like I'd stolen something. In a way, I had a future that was written by Mallerie. Spotlight, a version of myself untouched by thelables they'd given me, a family to nursey. Kept it Vegas, still working at the airport, I'd say, and they'd not already looking past Mallerie. Would cut in with stories about their new kitchen remodel, her husband's promotion, her influencer collab with some skincare brand. I didn't interrupt and never did. Being invisible had become a familiar, comfortable even. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that while they were laughing at stories about the little sister hookered over orange juice spills, I was slogging flight hours over 5 different countries. I was learning to navigate weather patterns and emergency landing. Sea was flying jets they called and pronounced the names of, and I never once thought of inviting them on board. My first solo flight was in an old Cessna 172 with faded blue stripes and a throttle that stuck slightly when you pushed it too hard. The kind of planet that teaches you humility, precision, patience. I was 19, hands shaking on the oak, heartbeat loud in my headset. But when the wheels lifted and the earth slid away beneath me, I remember thinking, this is mine. No one else gets to touch this. It's strange how clarity lives at 10,000 feet. I trained in Arizona, far from cold politeness of home, far from dinner tables where Mallerie's stores always landed. Louder than mine. Theft flight school was brutal, competitive. I worked 2 jobs, one in baggage handling at a local airport, another cleaning hangars at night just to afford extra simulator time. I didn't complain. Thessaland suited me. It gave me room to become someone else. By 26, I had my commercial license. By 30, I was flying Gulfstreams for a private charter company that catered to CEOs, athletes, oil magnates. I met people whose names world whispered, people who shook hands in boardrooms that decided nationality. Never named names. It wasn't part of job. The funny part, my family still thought I worked at the airport on some. Mallerie asked during a Christmas brunch, so do you like skin tickets or check luggage? I just smiled and said something like that. She moved on before I could explain. Not that I would have. Explaining meant opening a door I'd spent years learning to keep closed. My parents didn't ask. They were busy bragging about Mallerie's latest home renovation and how Liam got into a competitive STEM summer camp. When I mentioned I'd be flying out of nice the following week, they blinked. My dad said, is that in Nevada? And nodded. Sure, Dad, Nevada. They didn't careen out and notice the difference, and honestly I preferred it that way because it truth is when people underestimate long enough, they stop noticing when you rise. And when you rise silently without needing their applause, it unsettles them more than any spotlight ever. Could I kept it that way on purpose? The uniform stayed folded in my travel bag, my headset tucked into a custom leather case. No frame certificates, no glossy pictures on the mantle. I never posted about it. No one from my family followed. The charter company online saw there was no risk of them stumbling on Apris. Release her photo up by waist and visible by design, but sometimes I wondered not for their approval. That ship had sailed long ago, but I wonder at what it said about a family that could sit across from you for years and never once ask what do you love, what are you proud of, what do you do when no one's watching? I wasn't hiding, I just wasn't volunteering, and maybe that was my quiet revenge. While I traded stories over Chardonnay and small talk, I was watching sunrise over the Atlantic from a cockpit, window charting puffs, rudder bilance and tailwinds guiding stringers safely through sky, and storm, and all the while no one at that to blend in, not until the one person they didn't train to look down on finally spoke. The invitation came in a group text. Mallerie sent at 6:02 a.m. on Odense family BBQ at our place next Saturday. Bring whatever, let's catch up, it's been too long. I stared at the message for a full minute. It was her usual tone, breezy, performative, everything to include while still reminding everyone who was in charge. She always picked the venue, controlled the guest list, decided the narrative before the event began. I usually ignored her invites. I'd come up with work excuse and technically they were true. Being on call for charter flights meant I called a Sapier across oceans and in our snotus, but this time something told Meadow say yes. I typed, I'll be there before I could overthink it, and immediately get pressing send, not because I didn't mean it, but because I knew exactly what she'd do with it. That week she messaged again, bring your famous fruit salad, people still talk about it lowly. Hadn't made a fruit salad in years and no one ever talked about it, but I said her. Then came the photo of her backyard setup, string lights, curated outdoor cushions, Liam's new soccer goal position like decor. Mallerie was already staging the event. Like an Instagram shoot, Saturday arrived hot and cloudless. I wore a simple white linen shirt, slacks, and flats, hair tied back, no makeup, no jewelry. I parked 2 blocks away out of habit. Even now I never liked the idea of showing up with anything they could judge. Her backyard was already full, neighbors, cousins, old family friends. Mallerie had a Bluetooth speaker playing some top 40 playlist and she floated between conversations. Like she was running for office. She spotted him halfway through pouring a glass off her. Well, look who decided to show up, she sang, and right on time to help with corn. You always were the quiet, reliable one. I smiled, nice to see you, Mallerie. She handed me tongs like it was a game, like she still had the power to cast me into the role. She needed Meadow play the helper, the harmless background. I took them because I wasn't there to argue, I was here to observe the usual dance played out. Mallerie telling stories of full volume, always that protagonist, our parents beaming whenever she mentioned her son's school scores or her husband's real estate wins. When each met in with a nice weather, no one replied. At one point she introduced Meadow, a neighbor, with a laugh. This is Mrs. Sierra. She works something with planes, right? I nodded, something like that. The woman smiled politely and moved in. Mallerie turned back to the grill, smirking as if she just successful. I filed me under irrelevant again. I let her think I'd come here to fade, like always let her narrate the afternoon. However she wanted, because I knew something she didn't. Liam, her 10-year-old son, had spent last Thanksgiving weekend with me when Mallerie and her husband went on a cruise. I'd taken him to the hangar, let them sit in the cockpit, let him wear my spare headset. I'd shown him what I did, not for credit but because he asked. How had looked at me wide-eyed and whispered, you fly this? And I had said every week. He hadn't forgotten. The sun had started to dip behind the fence, casting long amber lines across the patio. People had settled into the second round of drinks, the kind that made their laughter louder and their judgment looser. That was always Mallerie's favorite time, when she could turn the spotlight into a weapon and call it just teasing. She sat on the wicker bench near the fire pit, glass of wine in hand, surrounded by any age or semicircle. I saw it coming the moment she leaned forward with that Grinch always wore when she was about 2 for a story everyone else was too polite to challenge. You guys remember when Sierra got lost in the grocery store for like an hour? She said, looking straight at her aunt. She cried so hard the store manager had to give her a free lollipop just to calm her down, and she was worried I didn't answer. I didn't even flinch. Some allowed my uncle, I think another chimed in. Sierra, really? I can't picture that. Mallerie continued, animated now. She was always so dramatic about the smallest things. I mean, even in school, remember the time she refused to present their science fair project and just stood there frozen? That was peak Sierra. I stirred at my half-full glass of water, still clear. My name was being passed around like a party trick, and everyone knew us to use to the taste to question I except one. Liam was sitting cross-legged on the edge of the lawn holding a half-eaten popsicle and watching his mother closely. He wasn't laughing, he was smiling. His small eyebrows were drawn in just enough for me to notice. Ethan, he stood up, Mom, he said, not loudly but clear enough. Mallerie paused mid-sentence. What, sweetie? He walked over and looked at her, puzzled. Why are you making fun of Aunt Sierra? Mallerie blinked, thrown. I'm not, baby, we're just telling funny stories, it's all in good fun. But he turned towards me, then looked back at her. She flies a jet silence, real silence. The kind that presses against the skin. Glasses paused, mid-sip, chairs creak. Someone cautioned. Didn't finish the sound Mallory's mill faltered she would a cousin? Asked it half laughing like he wasn't sure if this was part of the act. Liam nodded. She took me to her airport. She let me sit in seat with all the controls. She sage flies people around the world. She's a pilot. Mallory opened her mouth closeted. My father's head turned sharply. My mother's brows furrowed like she'd heard something in a language she long forgotten, and I didn't move. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I just let it land. Let it over, let it settle on their shoulders like a truth too heavy to laugh off. Knew what to say. It was a kind of silence that didn't just fall over a room. It stayed thick, awkward, clinging to there like smoke. After something burnt. He'd seen that look before in cockpits when a system failed midair, and the crew had 3 seconds to process it, but here the only system that had failed was their narrative of who I was. Mallory still hadn't blinked. She stared at Liam like had betrayed her carefully curated image. The fun, witty older sister with pitiful, invisible sibling had cracked in front of her own son, and worse, she didn't see it coming. My motherly set down her drink, clearing her throat like she might reclaim control. Off moments here, honey, I didn't know ya were flying those kinds of planes. Ismail gently. You never asked what kind of planes. My father gave a dry little laugh, trying to lighten the mood. Guess you've been full of surprise. Snow, I said simply. You've just been full of assumptions. There was nothing cruel in my tone, just the kind of stillness that comes from years of being overlooked and misunderstood until you learn that correction isn't owed, it's optional. And Valerie chimed in, nervously cheerful. Well, I think it's wonderful. I mean, not many people do what you do, right? Everyone at the room mumbled something like agreement, though no one met my ice pick hours to do that, with me acknowledging how long they'd been looking past me. And I wasn't interested in forced compliments. Not tonight. Liam came over and stood beside me again like he knew I needed something steady to hold on to even if I didn't reach for it. He was quiet now, but his presence was loud in a way only honesty can be. I caught Mallory's gaze. For the first time in my life, she looked smaller than, not physically, but something in her eyes had shrunk. There was confusion there, and beneath it something close to fear. Embarrassment, maybe just the shock of seeing a version of me she hadn't written. The script for her voice was small. Why didn't you ever say anything? He tilted my head, considered answering. For real? Then I settled for the truth because you never made space to listen. Words hung there. No one tried to dismiss them, not even her. I stood brushing invisible wrinkles from my shirt. Liam looked up. Hopeful. Are you living? He asked. I think I've been here long enough. His shoulders drooped a little. Will you come back? I crouched slightly. So, only he could harm. That depends. You still want to learn what all the switches do? His face lit up. Yeah. Then maybe, I said. One day. I ruffled his hair and turned toward the gate. I didn't need to storm out or make a statement. The silence behind me said everything this time. It didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like consequence, and no one stopped me. They just watched like passengers who just realized someone else had been flying the plane all along the morning after the barbecue. I was 37,000 feet above the Atlantic, wrapped in a silence I had chosen. Up here there were no questions. Like, what do you do again? No dismissive laughter, no rewrites of my life served as punchlines. Just skylight turbulence and trust from people who handed me their lives without knowing my name. I sat in the cockpit and steady voice, clear focus. That's where I belong, not at folding chairs in someone else's backyard, not in conversations that mistake silence for emptiness. I thought about Mallerie, about the way her face cracked just slightly when her son said, what Shenever could she flies the jet? Not choose to, not she wants to. She does. Present tense, unavoidable. Real. I don't think she'll bring it up. I don't expect an apology, but I know she heard it. No, they all did, and for once they didn't have a comeback. Why didn't you ever say anything? And I told her that truth. Because you never asked, not out of spite, not to wound her, but because it had been true for years. They built a version of me that was small, quite convenient, and I let them because I didn't need their permission to grow beyond it. But Liam asked. He looked Hessa, and in one moment he reminded them of everything they had missed while they were too busy talking over me. That's what stayed with me the most, not the silence. After, not the awkward glance, look in his eyes when he said it, sir, proud, unbothered. He didn't say it to defend me. He said it because it was normal to him, because to a child raised with truth, power doesn't need to be loud to be real. That's what I carry with me to the clouds. I don't need my family to clap. I don't need them to understand. They just need what I've always had, runway altitude, and the calm that comes from knowing exactly who I am. And up here the ski doesn't ask me where I've been. It simply clears the air and lets me fly.